book, I always say it wrong. I always say Good Girl, Gay God. That's not the title of the book. The title of the book is Gay Girl, Good God. And it's a really excellent book, and I'm going to read a little bit from it. I'm bringing it up again to recommend it to you. It's not a long book. It's an easy read. It's both entertaining and insightful. It's a great book, so I commend it to you. So, a little bit about Jackie Hill Perry. She was born to a mother who had not planned her. She had been casually involved with a coworker. They worked at a restaurant. They were casually involved, and she became pregnant. And the father had no interest in a long-term relationship with her mother, nor did he have any interest in fathering Jackie. At one point, she tells a story of how her father said, "Really, my life wouldn't change, and I would not be upset if you were not in it." He had no interest in being a part of her life. So when the mother became pregnant, she was talking to her best friend, and the mother said, "I didn't want to have a baby this way." She was considering abortion, which she wanted a baby, but she didn't want it with this man, and she didn't want it alone, and she didn't want it in this way. Her friend responded, "How do you know that God didn't want you to have the baby this way?" So Jackie says in her book, "Like a cold glass of water to the face, my mother's eye widened. Her heart beat truth into her chest, and the noise of death quieted down for a second. She had never considered providence and how involved it was with her womb. God, all-knowing, maker of man, creator of life, had orchestrated my conception. Though accomplished in sinful lusts, he had given me to her. He was forming me in her womb. Unbeknownst to her, he had chosen me before the foundation of the world to know him, and no one, not my mother, my father, or even me, would get in his way." God planned Jackie, and God gets what he plans. Later, she had been living a lesbian lifestyle, messing around with recreational drugs. She had been arrested for shoplifting. She was just kind of struggling in her life, and she was speaking to her cousin, who was a Christian, and Jackie said to her, "I feel like God is calling me. I feel like he's trying to get my attention." She just kind of kept having God show up. You know how that happens, the hound of heaven. And her cousin replied, "I'm not worried about you, Jackie. God's hand is on you, and he is going to do what he has to do to show you how much you need him." And then she said, "I'm praying for you." And that was the end of it. She just prayed for Jackie. As things went by, her dad died. And she kind of talked about how even though it wasn't a loss in her day-to-day life, she had always kind of held on to hope that there would be a relationship. There was a loss there. Her car got towed for a whole bunch of messy reasons. Her relationship with her mom was on the rocks, and she said she just became extremely disrespectful, and she just was in a bad place. And she says, then she goes on and says this. She was talking to her friend on the porch. "Is God trying to get my attention by making my life harder or something?" I said, blowing smoke out between questions. I said it out loud, but mainly meant for God to hear and relent. I mean, does God want me that much? As grace would have it, he did. God had planned Jackie, and he had a plan for Jackie, and God accomplishes his plans. She says, "Without asking me my permission, a good God came to my rescue." Who can relate to that? I can. "Without asking me my permission, a good God came to my rescue." God isn't bound by your free will. Sure, he gives it, but he can override it whenever he chooses, like he did here with Jackie. He intended grace, mercy, and abundant life for Jackie Hill Perry. And despite her best efforts to get away from those things, don't know why we do it, but we do, God did as it pleased him with Jackie. And she's a beautiful and eloquent picture of what God's goodness does to a soul once grace gets to it. God's in charge. God intends mercy. So our response is to bow the knee. This is where we're going today and a little bit next month. We're going to have a front row seat to this storm of mercy. That's the title of our entire series this year, that was hurled at Jonah's rebellion, and then the gracious rescue that came in the form of the great fish. Without his permission, a good God came to Jonah's rescue. We see Romans 8:28, God working all things. You know, she talks about being conceived in sinful lust, and he's working all things. Your mistakes, he's working nature, he's working every single thing for our good. And we see this come through for Jonah, and I hope that you'll reflect on how it's coming true for you as well. Prior to this passage, and last month I talked about it, I see kind of the author of Jonah as having two goals with telling this story. He wants to teach a lesson that we would learn from Jonah's mistakes. It's like, I said, it's like the boy who cried wolf. You say, this is what happened to the boy who cried wolf. You don't want to be like him, right? And so we see the author doing that with Jonah. See all these things Jonah's doing, not making good decisions. Don't be like Jonah. You don't want to end up like him, right? And then the second thing is I talked about it's really a book about God, and we see the character of God and his majesty and his mercy and all the good things about God really come to the forefront in our minds in contrast to Jonah's stupidity, honestly. And I saw them as kind of two distinct goals. But as I studied this passage and then considered the whole book, I saw these two goals merge, and hopefully I can explain what I mean by this well. The author helps us learn and avoid Jonah's mistakes by helping us know more about God. Does that make sense? So the author shows that course correction took place for Jonah as he embraced in life about God what he confessed with his mouth about God. Sinclair Ferguson, I read this one, I think, in the introduction session. It is really a book about God and how one man came through painful experience to discover the true character of the God whom he had already served in earlier years of his life. He was to find the doctrine about God with which he had long been familiar. He was a prophet, prophesying about the sovereignty and mercy of God. He knew those doctrines. But they came alive in his experience. It is this combination of doctrine and experience that makes Jonah such a fascinating, instructive, and practical book. So Jonah's course correction, we learn to avoid Jonah's mistakes by learning the things about God that Jonah learns about God in this. And it's by aligning, we start to go off course. We come back on track by saying, truth about God, how does it affect my life? Okay, I'm going off track. I'm ignoring a truth about God. I need to course correct and look at truth about God. Jhumpa Lahiri, she writes novels. She says, that's the thing about books. They let you travel without moving your feet. And that's what Jonah does for us. We get to travel this road with Jonah. We get to learn the lessons that Jonah learns without getting a storm hurled at us or being in the belly of a whale. We get to learn about God more fully and then to apply it to our lives as we sit here comfortably. And as we apply these truths about God, we then find ourselves on track. See, Jonah knew that God was sovereign and powerful. In verse 9, he says, I'm a Hebrew and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. So he's making a confession about God. He was confessing, that fear of the Lord and that he is creator of all. He's sovereign. He's mighty. And I'm thinking, really, Jonah? That's what you think? Because you're running away from this God that you are acting as like is so sovereign and so huge and creator of dry land. His behavior and his beliefs are not lining up. I think Jonah probably really did believe that he believed those things, but this shows that at the core of his beliefs believed something different. He wasn't really fearing the Lord. He was living in fear of comfort and pleasure, because when the Lord told him to do something he didn't want to do, he ran away. Ed Welsh, in his book about addiction, says, when our desires conflict with Scripture, human beings do not always live according to what we say we believe. We can say we believe one thing, but our lives betray other allegiances. A husband can say he loves his wife, but his actions reveal that he loves his pornographic habits or flirtatious work relationships. A woman may be an avowed follower of Jesus, but when she feels alone, she pursues sexual relationships to satisfy her sense of emptiness. Her life reveals that at the core, she is a follower of her desires. And so we all have these things, these disconnects in our life, where we believe a thing, but our actions betray a different belief. And this is what we see here with Jonah. He made a confession about God. He was a good hearer of the truth that God is powerful and sovereign, but he lived as though this wasn't true. So he was not a good doer of the truth that God is good and sovereign. We have to be doers of all of Scripture, not just the parts that give us explicit commands. Obey your parents. Okay, check. God is good and sovereign. It's hard sometimes to know how to do that truth, but we need to do that truth as well, and that's how we course correct, by learning these truths about God and then doing them in our lives. Jonah learned this lesson the hard way, and we're going to learn this lesson hopefully a little bit today in this specific area of his sovereignty and his power. So, we have 3 points. A great God, a great fear, and an even greater Jonah. So the first thing, we serve a great and mighty God. Forrest Gump says, I don't know if we each have a destiny or if we're all just floating around accidental like on a breeze. You know, the feather in the movie, it symbolizes fate. It's kind of just going along capriciously. It doesn't really have an end goal, just doing its thing. And then it tickles our fancy when coincidentally there's Forrest standing behind JFK or something. You know, it's just, it doesn't have a goal, it's just floating. He says, life is like a box of chocolates. You never know what you're going to get. So I'm not good at titles. I really don't like my title, but I titled this session, Life is Not a Box of Chocolates. The movie is kind of feel-good movie on the surface. For a control freak like me, it's an epic nightmare. But I think that the message is kind of sit back and enjoy the ride because you can't control it anyway. It's going to go where it's going to go. Thankfully, Scripture promises us something different. It is true we don't know what we're going to get, but the Lord knows what we're going to get. And Psalm 23, it promises, surely good and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life. And then in Philippians, he who started a good work in me has a plan to bring it to completion. We serve a God who has a plan. And his plan is for mercy and it's for redemption. And so he's got that plan, that's great, but he is also able and determined to accomplish that plan. There we go, keeping up. Okay. From the beginning to the end of God's story told in Scripture, we see that his plan is for redemption and restoration. In Genesis 3:15, redemption is promised when he says that Jesus is going to crush the head of the serpent. Then in Revelation 21:5 at the very end, he says, behold, he's coming back. Behold, I come to make all things new. And so there's that promise of redemption finally made manifest. And the book of Jonah is no exception to this. It pushes God's story of redemption forward. We see merciful redemption for a reluctant prophet and also for evil nations. God's plan for redemption is being carried out and pushed forward. The passage before this outlines Jonah's rebellion and his stupid decisions. But this passage teaches us that rebellious man never has the last word. Oh, I'm sorry, see, I'm not actually keeping up. Rebellious man never has the last word. Chapter 1, verse 3, but Jonah, what comes next? Jonah 1:4, but the Lord. The Lord has the final say. It reminds me of Ephesians chapter 2 when it says, you are dead in your trespasses and sins, following the course of this world. What else do we have? Lived in the passions of our flesh, children of wrath, all these really unflattering things. But God, being rich in mercy, gets the last word. Because of the great love with which he loved us, even when we were dead in our trespasses, he made us alive together with Christ. So God has a plan. He has a plan for your existence and mine. He has a plan for history, and I love this because I love plans, and I love goals, and I like knowing where we're going. My husband, it drives him nuts. One time he was growing out his hair, and I said, what's your plan? Like, what are you doing right now with this hair thing? Do you have a goal? Are you trying to get in a ponytail? You know, I can get on board with it if we have a plan. I don't have a plan. Oh, cut it. No, you have to have a plan. I like to have a plan. I like to know where I'm going. I can handle the mess in the meantime if I know that we have a plan, right? I've made lots of plans in my life. When I was very little, I planned to be a missionary, a medical missionary. And I planned to remain always strong in my faith. As I grew, I planned to work in a public health clinic in West Africa. In college, I planned to abandon my faith when I went to West Africa. And then when I came back, I got a job at a lab that then happened to be giving me like the perfect opportunity to actually practice public health in West Africa, and I got pregnant, so I couldn't go. So then I was pregnant, I was making plans for that, and I'm going to have a natural birth, and I'm not going to have medication, and it's going to be beautiful, and then I had preeclampsia and had a C-section. Then after I had my children, I planned to have well-adjusted, respectful, cultured children that sit like this in church and can read by the age of 3. Now I'm planning for them to go to school. I would like to start writing. I have plans for more service here at Converge. I have plans. But I've lived long enough to know my plans are absolutely useless. My life is a testimony that I can't make my plans come to fruition. I can try and try. It's not working. But my plans aren't coming to fruition. This story of Jonah teaches me that everything is going exactly according to God's plan. He isn't simply watching the feather blow in the wind. God created the feather, and he's directing the wind. So yes, the feather is blowing in the wind, but it's not according to fate. It's not just capricious. It's not by chance. God is directing it. He has a specific plan. And unlike you and me, God is able and determined to accomplish this plan. And we see here in this passage of Jonah, and really the whole thing, we see God's sovereignty and his mercy get married. God's plan and power are displayed in this passage by God's ability to use the ugly to heal the ugly. Not a person on board this ship has any inclination towards God. We've got pagan sailors, and we've got a prophet running away from God. But somehow at the end, they're all worshiping the Lord. He makes beautiful out of ugly. I can't do that. There's not a single thing in this situation that should say, let's walk towards the Lord, and yet God has everyone walking towards the Lord because of a storm, no less. Okay, so this is mercy and grace and power at its finest and most surprising. So we do have an explicit stating of God's specific plan in Jonah. In the beginning, he says, Jonah, go to Nineveh, call out against it. So God had a plan that Nineveh should repent, and he had a plan that Jonah would be the hands and feet that would get that plan to come to fruition. And so then we watch the whole rest of the story. God's working all things, all details according to this plan. And so we've got God is greater than a couple of things we see in this passage. He's greater than nature. He's greater than other gods. He is greater than human free will or effort. And he's greater than chance. So God is greater than nature. I should have brought, are there any extra verses up on the table, on any of the tables, the passage? Sorry, I should have brought it up there with me. Here we go. Okay, thanks. Okay, sorry. So verse 4, but the Lord hurled a great wind upon the sea, and there was a mighty tempest on the sea, so that the ship threatened to break up. The Lord hurled that storm. The Lord used the storm like a javelin. The word hurled, I said this before, is used, I think it's in 1 Samuel, to talk about hurling a javelin, which has a specific purpose, a specific target. It's not just kind of like, oh, storm. It's like very intentional. It's used as a weapon. And God hurled a storm that way. Then in verse 15, he calmed the storm. And then in next month's passage, in verse 17, he appointed a great fish to swallow Jonah. So God is in control of nature. We see, even when we see in a just sheer display of his wrath when he flooded the earth. That, anyone here flood the earth? I want to flood my home sometimes when everyone's going crazy. We don't have that kind of control. God, we can't even begin to understand, has control over nature. The second thing, he's greater than other gods. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this to show how it's a little bit more applicable. But in verse 5, then the mariners were afraid, and each cried out to his God. Later they begged Jonah to cry out to his God. Then they cast lots, and the lot fell on Jonah. So they said, who are you? And he says, I am a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land. And the men were exceedingly afraid and said to him, what is this that you have done? Side note, even the pagan sailors saw the disconnect between the truth that Jonah spoke and the truth that Jonah lived. They're like, why are you running away from this God that made the sea and dry land? Foolish. Not true. So anyway, side note. But immediately the men were afraid of a God who was of heaven and who made the land and the sea. Why? In this time, the sea was the embodiment of the gods. It was a representation. It was this uncontrollable, unpredictable force, and it was the embodiment of the wrath of the gods. And so you had the God of the sky and God of the sea and God of all these things. And the sea was a very in-your-face representation of the chaotic and lawless gods that just did whatever they wanted. There were many gods, so it was chaotic. You don't know which god you might have been offending because there were many of them. And then these polytheistic gods in pagan culture, the gods were non-moral. And what that means is they weren't expressing anger because of breaking a written code. We have the 10 Commandments. Okay, so I know what I'll do that offends God. These gods were just like, you looked at me the wrong way. It's like in Friends, Ross and Rachel, they're like having a baby, yada, yada, yada. But she, at one point, is really annoyed at Ross, and everything that she does is annoying, and then he's just like breathing. And she's like, that's great, Ross, can you breathe any louder? Because his breathing irritated her. And sometimes I'm like that. Sometimes I'm like, the littlest things can and we send off our wrath. That's what these polytheistic gods were like. You really didn't know who you were offending, and you didn't know why you were offending, so you were in this chaotic, frantic search to find the answer and what can I do to appease these gods. They were uncontrollable and unpredictable and prone to anger. And they showed their wrath through the sea. But here comes Jonah, who serves the God of heaven, above Baal, who was the sky god. He was the god of the sky. So now we have God of heaven superseding the sky god, and he made the sea. He's in charge of the sea. Not only can he control it like these other gods, but he made that thing. He can squash the thing that's squashing you, in other words. So here is a God that has the ability to calm and control that which is chaotic, uncontrollable, unpredictable, and angry. Depicting God, or Yahweh, there's gods in this, and then there's Yahweh. Yahweh is God of Israel, God of the Bible, our God. Depicting Yahweh as Lord of the sea was intentional because of the superstitions about the sea. It was a deliberate picture of the lordship of Yahweh over all things, especially other gods. So I was thinking about, how is this applicable? We don't really worship gods like this. We don't have, God of the sea, God of the sky, whatever. If you do, come talk to me. But we don't do that kind of thing. But we do see ourselves at the mercy of chaotic, uncontrollable, unpredictable forces. There are things that we think are just, they're not controllable. Maybe it's fate. Maybe you agree with Forrest Gump. Somewhere deep inside you think life's just floating along accidental like on a breeze, and so you're at the mercy of fate. Or maybe you feel like you're at the mercy of nature and health, and it's just something you can't control. It's just going to happen. Maybe you feel that way about Satan. Maybe you feel like he's an uncontrollable force that you're at his mercy. It's this idea of, what are you at the mercy of? And God is bigger than that thing. You're really at the mercy of God because the thing you're at the mercy at is at the mercy of God, if that makes sense. So God is greater than nature. He's greater than other gods or other fears, I guess we could say. And then God is greater than human effort. This one's the big one for me. So we see the effort of the sailors in verse 5. And they hurled the cargo that was in the ship into the sea to lighten it for them. And then we see later, where is it? Down here. Nevertheless, the men rowed hard to get back to dry land, but they could not, for the sea grew more and more tempestuous against them. So these sailors were experienced. This was not their first time on the sea. This would not be their first time experiencing a storm. They would have some knowledge and they would have some strength in how to handle a storm. When crying out to their gods didn't work, they took things into their own hand and they did what humans always do. They relied on themselves. God was like, nope, not going to happen. Going to make the storm even bigger. That's not going to work. Throwing those things overboard, it's not going to work. Sure, go ahead, row to dry land and try to leave Jonah off. That's not how I want it done. It's not going to happen. He's in control, and he's not going to let human free will, human effort win the battle. There is no battle, really. And then we see this with Jonah in kind of almost a humorous way. Sorry, guys. See, I thought I was going to do better with my slides, and I'm just not. Okay. So, Jonah. We see the effort of Jonah. God's greater than Jonah's efforts. Richard Phillips says, Jonah resigned his office as a prophet, but the Lord did not accept his resignation. God will get his ends, but he also gets it by the means he wants as well. Sometimes we say, I've probably said this, God will accomplish his plan, but it's up to you if you get to be a part of it or not. Not according to Jonah. God's going to accomplish his plan, and it's up to God if you're going to be a part of it or not. You don't get to choose. You're going to be a part of it if he wants you to be a part of it. So just get on board. I get the sentiment, but it's just not up to us. We don't get to choose if we get to be a part of God's plan. He's in charge of the ends, and he's in charge of the means. Remember Jackie Hill Perry? Against her best efforts, she was saved, and now she is an incredible witness to the homosexual community, to the broader secular community, encouragement and a strength and an instructor to the Christian community. She's just amazing. She didn't want to be all of those things, but God wanted her to be the one that did it, and so that's what happened. And Jackie Hill Perry is saying, thank you, Lord, for that, right? Jonah is not the story of a man who was blessed by remaining doing horrible. Jonah is not the story of a man who was blessed by remaining in God's will, but rather of a man who was mightily used of God despite his unbelief and sin, because of God's sovereign grace in his life. This is like the divine LOL, I think, because Jonah was trying to run away from having to witness to pagan Gentiles, and he found himself on board of a ship witnessing to pagan Gentiles. As a result of his flight from pagan Gentiles, God includes pagan Gentiles. And it's just like, okay, God gets what God wants. And what's more, not only did he reach more pagan Gentiles because of Jonah's folly, but we know that he did end up actually going and accomplishing the plan that was originally designed for him. It's not like, oh, well, you ended up here, so let me save these people instead. Nope. Save these people, bonus. Also, you will do what I told you were going to do. So greater than nature, greater than other gods, greater than human effort, and the last thing is greater than chance or fate. So we see casting lots. There's this real big, heavy, like contrasting theme of the frailty of human effort and chance and all of these things, and then the supremacy and the sovereignty of God. In the ancient Near East, and even in Hebrew culture, even in the Bible, we see that casting lots was used to make decisions or to discern the will of the Lord. Like it was something that was okay. Like, we always think of casting lots as a bad thing and not relying on the Lord. But Richard Phillips explains that the right use of lots was in seeking God's will. It was a way of saying, let it be God's will that decides. In other words, nothing is up to chance. This isn't chance. God's going to control what I'm doing. Like, there wasn't even this presupposition of chance. It was a presupposition of God's control, and therefore I'm going to cast lots because I can't figure this out. Just a side note that I thought was interesting. So lots were cast in a God-honoring way up until Judas was replaced when they were finding his disciple. Then the Holy Spirit was given, and no longer were lots casted. And at that point, it was, if any of you lack wisdom, ask God, and the Spirit of God will give it to you. And then in Acts 6, we see this happening when they're deciding on elders. It was because of the wisdom of the Spirit. So I just thought that was interesting, how we now have the spirits. We're not casting lots and, letting God determine the lots. We have that Spirit within us that can lead us and guide us. So not necessarily part of the flow, but thought it was interesting to point out. But anyway, the point is, the people understood that chance was in the hands of God. God is greater than chance. He's not crossing his fingers, wishing us luck, or hoping for a better tomorrow. Proverbs 16:33, the lot is cast into the lap, but its every decision is from the Lord. Paul Tripp always says there's no such thing as chance. There's just not. And this passage confirms it. They cast lots, and obviously, the mariners were not doing it in a God-honoring way, so they really were, I guess, leaving it up to chance. I'm not really sure. But this explicit exercise of chance was controlled and dictated by God. He's like, go ahead, cast lots. I'm going to set it on Jonah. It's going to go on Jonah. This is all about Jonah. I'm going to get my way. Come on, people. Kyle and Delitzsch, they do really intense commentaries, but there was this little nugget of something that made sense to me. The fugitive is taken by lot, not from any virtue in lots themselves, least of all the lots of the heathen, but by the will of him who governs uncertain lots. Remember the feather. Sure, the feather is floating in the wind, but like I already said, God is leading the wind. He's the one blowing it where it's going to go. It's not up to chance. So before we move to the next section, I want to pause for a minute because your first discussion question centers on this point. So I want you to pause. Where does your confession of God's sovereignty over these things not line up with your behavior? Does your behavior betray a deep belief that nature or other uncontrollable forces or human effort or will or chance, does your behavior betray that you believe those things are outside of the control of God? My answer to that is human will and effort. I really struggle, salvation belongs to the Lord. That's hard for me to believe. I think that it's up to Dave and me to make sure that my children love God and follow him and serve him. And so how does my behavior reflect the fact that I don't actually think God's going to save them? I think that Dave and I are going to save them. We went through a little period of time when I was extremely fearful and I was extremely critical of Dave and the way he was doing things, and then putting intense pressure on myself because I believed that our behavior could sway my kids and that our behavior and their beliefs were outside of God's control. It's up to us. We had to do it right. And so I was extremely critical, picking fights, nagging, everything that's not nice in a wife I was doing. And then I was just paralyzed myself because of the pressure that I felt to do everything right. And so that's where my behavior betrayed a belief that salvation doesn't belong to the Lord. It betrayed a belief that human effort, human will is outside of God's control. And so I have to course correct, and I have to constantly remember this truth. Salvation belongs to the Lord. That's what Jonah says in the next thing in response to his sovereignty. Salvation belongs to the Lord. It's his doing. And so that truth about God is what I have to keep. Literally, that's the practical step that I have to take when I start going down this path of being critical and putting pressure on myself. Salvation belongs to the Lord. I don't have 5 steps of how to have more peace in my life. I remember that salvation belongs to the Lord. And so I ask you, think about it just kind of as we're going through, and that's one of the things we'll talk about at the end. But the sailors, they come to live this truth. They course correct when they confess the truth. For you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. That's in verse 14. For you, O Lord, for you, Yahweh. This is when they start using the word Yahweh. For you, Yahweh, have done as it pleased you. And this statement was the preamble to their living this truth and giving into his will. This is when they get ready to, fine, we'll throw Jonah overboard. You're going to do what you want, so we're going to submit to your will. We have to pause and marvel at the magnificence of a God who has every single thing under his control and that he does as it pleases him. God does what he wants. I can't make a little hour cookie making session go pleasantly the way that I wanted to go, and yet he is doing that in the entire universe for all of history. He does as it pleases him. And we really need to stop and marvel at this. The Lord does as it pleases him. So the next point is a great fear. Typically, when we talk about the power and sovereignty of God, what is the typical outgrowth, practical outgrowth that we encourage? When you think about the sovereignty and power of God, what do you think? What that means I should trust him, right? Which is true, and that is a good practical outcome and a good practical growth out of this, but it's only one side of the coin. Here we see that another appropriate and necessary outgrowth of experiential knowledge of these doctrines of his sovereignty and power is fear, the fear of the Lord. The sailors knew the right response to this kind of fear. It says in verse 16, they feared with a great fear. And even before that, when they heard that he was the maker of land and sea, they said, it says, the men were exceedingly afraid. It's also true in Mark 4 when Jesus calms the storm. What does it say? And they were filled with a great fear and said to one another, who then is this that even the wind and the sea obey him? So our response is yes, we trust because we know that he is for us, but also we're at the mercy and we're in the hands of a terrifying God. Are we not? He's in charge of literally everything, and he knows what he wants. And we presume to get in his way and to say, nah, I'm not doing it your way. So what does the fear of the Lord look like? This is, I think I said to Terry in the beginning, there's not really a whole lot that's more confusing than the fear of the Lord, especially for Christians. What is it? We're supposed to be afraid of God? What does this mean? So looking at this passage, I'm going to have an attempt for interaction. If it doesn't work, I have answers prepared. But from looking at this passage, how would you characterize fear of the Lord based on the confession of fear from the sailors, Jonah's response, and what you see in this passage? What does fear of the Lord mean? See, Jess? Anybody have anything? Great respect. Obedience, yep. Reverence. Anybody else have anything? No?
Humility versus his awesomeness?
Literally. Okay, hold on. In my notes. Where is it? When we get there, I'll give you a shout out, because I literally say humility versus the awesomeness of God. Literally, I say that. It's in here. Oh yeah, with a sense of humility and reverence and respect for the awesomeness of God. There you go. Okay. Someone was going to say something at this table?
That life and death are in his hands.
Uh-huh.
Our destruction, how we die, how
Yeah.
we live. But
Yeah.
that's like
He has the power to destroy, and he has the power to protect. Yeah. Okay, you guys know about the fear of the Lord a lot more than I did before I started this passage. So the things that I came up with are, there's a vulnerability. There's this, Vanel Alaco, she had this like great analogy of the fear of the Lord, and she talked about King Kong. Has anybody seen King Kong? I have not seen it all the way through, I will confess. And I was going to show a clip, but we're not a men's breakfast, so I decided not to. Because it's like T-Rex and King Kong fighting, and it's just like, okay, come on. So anyway, but in the movie, King Kong is this like crazy beast. He's scary, he's powerful, he destroys everything in his sight. Everything is at his mercy. That's the best way to put it. Everything is at his mercy. And Anne Darrow, she is the woman in the story. And so she is constantly, then she's running away from him for a period of time. And at one point she's actually sacrificed to him. I don't really understand why, but she was sacrificed to him. And she's at the mercy of this mighty and terrible King Kong. And there's this scene that I did watch on YouTube of him holding her, and she's trembling because she recognizes her frailty in the hands of this giant. And so she sees, literally, he could snap me. I'm so frail and I'm so small in the hands of this giant. And there's this feeling of vulnerability, and I thought of Hebrews 4:12. For the word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword, piercing to the division of soul and spirit, of joints and marrow, and discerning the thoughts and intentions of the heart. How vulnerable am I that God can see everything that's in my heart, and he has the power to snap me if he wants to. So then that leads us to have this trembling fear. So then we have submission, okay? I see this God who's looking at me, who has the power to snap me. I'm trembling in his presence. If he tells me to jump, I'm going to jump. If he tells me to run, I'm going to run. If he tells me, whatever he tells me, I'm going to do, because I have this fear of the Lord. When Jonah and the sailors recognized his power, they stopped appeasing the other guys. They feared so much, and they sought to appease Yahweh. They start doing everything he says. Jonah had already confessed the fear, we saw that, but his right response in living it happened now when he says, fine, pick me up and hurl me into the sea, then the sea will quiet for you, for I know it is because of me that this great tempest has come upon you. I'm done going against God's will. Death, he didn't know a great fish was going to come swallow him. Death was better than continuing in the terror of fighting this mighty and awesome God, so he submitted to God's will. And the sailors did the same thing. You know, we call them pagan sailors, and they sound like this like really scary motorcycle gang or something. They were probably average people, and they didn't want to become murderers, right? Maybe they did. I don't know them. But, you know, we assume that they're these like scary guys. They were probably average sailors, and they're like, we don't want to kill this guy. They even say that. They're like, don't let this innocent blood be on our hands. But they're like, what do they say? We know that you do as it pleases you, so we're going to pick him up and hurl him into the sea. And then the sea ceased from its raging. And it's interesting, before that, they acknowledge that vulnerability and that being at his mercy, because they say, nevertheless, the men rowed hard, the sea grew, blah, blah, blah. Oh Lord, let us not perish for this man's life. Thank you, Sue. And lay not on us innocent blood, for you, O Lord, have done as it pleased you. So they recognize their vulnerability. They know they're at his mercy, and so they do as he pleases. So we have vulnerability, we have submission. This is not, okay. And then the last thing that we have, where am I over here? Oh, and they also made vows and sacrifices. So they completely then vowed themselves to this God. They had complete submission. When we get back to dry land, we're serving Yahweh. With this, then the third, so vulnerability, submission, and then the third thing that we get from the fear of the Lord is that there's this sense of humility and reverence and respect for the awesomeness of God. You recognize your frailty, and you recognize the awesomeness of God, and then you live your life with that constantly in your mind. So I thought of Philippians, work out your salvation with fear and trembling, because you know that it is God who is at work in you to will and to work for his good pleasure. And the two words there, this verse and studying it was really influential for me to understand the fear of the Lord. The first word is phobo, which reminds you of the word phobia, right? Fears. It's recognition of frailty of self, and there's a sense of humility, and there's this idea of fleeing because of feeling inadequate. And when we think of phobias, it's not like something jumped out and scared me in the instant. A phobia is like it's a constant thing. It's something that is always kind of in the back of your mind. It's something that you are just Part of who you are is being afraid of this thing. And so that's part of the fear of the Lord. And then the second thing is trembling. That's tromo. And it's used to describe the anxiety of one who distrusts his ability to completely meet all requirements, but religiously does his utmost to fulfill his duty. So it's like you're completing a task and you don't know if you can do it, and so you're doing it with fear and trembling, but you're doing it as hard and best as you can to fulfill your duty anyway. Does that make sense? So I have to say, when I prepare for these sessions, I do it with fear and trembling every month. I'm talking about a big God and a mighty God and truth with a capital T. And I come up and I'm going to teach and I'm going to influence. And that's why I'm here today talking about the fear of the Lord instead of a feel-good message. Because I fear the Lord, and I'm tempted every month to fear you guys. And I'm tempted every month to make the message what I think you want to hear. And I'm tempted to say, I want people to be happy. I want people to like what I say. Therefore, let me tailor my message according to my fear of man. But God, who wills and works in you for his good pleasure, it's not because I'm so strong and fearful of the Lord, but he has worked in me, and he has put, I think, a calling there that I do it with fear and trembling, and I'm going to do it with fear of him and not fear of you. Sorry. And it's sometimes I get ready for these sessions, and I'm like, oh, good, we're going to talk about sin. And everyone's going to hate me. But would I rather him be against me or you? And then I have to think about that, and so I press ahead. And I hope that you guys are then blessed in it, because truth about God is better than truth that we want. He knows what he knows what we need. So there are lots of big and powerful things in the world. The question is, who do you see as the biggest and the most powerful? The way you behave reveals whether or not you see God as the biggest thing to fear or something else. Fear of the Lord means that God's pleasure and his power to get his pleasure are at the front of your mind when making decisions and pledging allegiances. That phobia, it's that thing that's always there. What does God want? I know he's going to get it. Let me fall in line because I know I'm at his mercy. I don't know if this story brings out the point, but the other night we have this like little dog toy for our dog. You put food in it and he can knock it around and get food out of it. And Evelyn likes to do the work for the dog, and she likes to kick it, and she likes to get the food out. And I said, Evelyn, please don't do that. And she said, but Tozer wants me to. And I said, can Tozer put you in timeout? No, you better listen to mommy, because mommy can put you in timeout. Tozer's going to get what Tozer's going to get. And I think that kind of puts a little bit of perspective also for this fear of the Lord. I'm afraid of you guys, but God can put me in eternal timeout. Not if I say something wrong. I'm not, teaching a works mentality. But, who do I fear? And remember, though, so that's one side of the coin that we have here from this power and sovereignty of God. The other side of the coin is trust, because we do bring back into the picture his ultimate plan for mercy and redemption. Hitler had power. People bent to his will. People were afraid of him. They did what he wanted because they were afraid. Crossing him would mean death. God has a power greater than Hitler's, and so we do fear him, and we bend to his will because he is the Lord and King of our life, but we also trust him. And we back into his corner when we see his majesty on display, because we know he is using that might and strength to take care of his own. So I want to be his own. I want to be in God's corner because I want him to fight for me, and I know that he will. He's using his might and power for the good of those who love him, who are called according to his purposes. And I just want to say, if this isn't you today, if you're not his own, if you don't feel like you're in the category of those who love him, who are called according to his purposes, today is the day. Back into God's corner today. Get in his corner. Let him fight for you. Respond to the fear of the Lord. He's holding you. He can snap you, but he won't if you back into his corner. Then he uses that strength and that might to fight for you. God is uncontrollable and unpredictable like these polytheistic gods, but he's also good. So I shared this last week in the suffering class. It's from the Chronicles of Narnia, and this is on your handout, and it's up here. Here we go. Okay. They're talking about Aslan. He's a lion that represents God, or Jesus. Well, God is Jesus. Jesus is God. Is he a man? Asked Lucy. Aslan a man? Said Mr. Beaver sternly. Certainly not. I tell you, he is king of the wood and the son of the great emperor beyond the sea. Don't you know who is the king of the beasts? Aslan is a lion, the great lion. Oh, Susan said, I thought he was a man. Is he quite safe? I shall feel rather nervous about meeting a lion. That you will, dearie, make no mistake, said Mrs. Beaver. If there's anyone who can appear before Aslan without their knees knocking, they're either braver than most or else just silly. Then he isn't safe, said Lucy. Safe, said Mr. Beaver. Don't you hear what Mrs. Beaver tells you? Who said anything about safe? Of course he isn't safe, but he's good. He's the king, I tell you. So we have this picture of God who is Lord and King and powerful, but he's good, and so we trust him. We see in this passage the display of his power and the response of fear that we ought to have, but the wider context of Jonah and all of Scripture shows us that he is doing it for his plan and for his plan of redemption. He is the king, like it says in Chronicles of Narnia. We approach him with knocking knees, but also ultimately trusting him when we put ourselves at his mercy. When you submit to his power and align yourself with him, you then enjoy his protection from all other danger. Fearing the Lord is for our good. When we put him in his rightful place as terrifying, we then allow ourselves, when we back into that corner, to not be terrified of all of these things. Deuteronomy in 6, it says, we fear the Lord for our good always. It's good to fear the Lord. There's a lot of places in Isaiah and in Nehemiah when it talks about delighting in fearing the Lord, which is really a crazy concept. But to continue this whole thing of King Kong, there's a scene where she's been running and running and running from King Kong because he's scary, all the stuff we've been talking about. And then here comes a T-Rex. And at one point you see her, she's between the two of them, and she looks at T-Rex. Oh, sorry. Right before this, T-Rex is attacking her, and King Kong comes in and grabs her. And even though he's like all over the place and fighting T-Rex and falling and all this stuff, somehow he's still gently holding her and she's not hurt. And then they all fall, and she falls down. And she's like, what is happening? She doesn't know if is he going to eat me? Like, why is he saving me? And so she's between these two. She sees T-Rex, and she sees King Kong. This is Vanelle's thing. I'm giving full credit to Vanelle. She's between these two, and she has a decision to make. Whose corner is she going to back into? King Kong's bigger. King Kong's going to win. King Kong also just rescued me. So you see her at this moment. She kind of looks, and then she goes, trembling. She's afraid still. She's turning her back to this big, scary monster. But she slowly backs into his corner, and then he fights, and he defeats T-Rex. And then at one point, you see him even cradling her, and she's sleeping in his hand. And she's fast asleep in all of this danger because she's in King Kong's hand. These other things are not going to get to her. She's terrified of King Kong, but when faced with another danger, she has a choice. King Kong is more terrifying. King Kong showed himself to be a protector, so she backs into his corner. So this is discussion question number 2. Whose corner are you backing into? Whose will are you bending to? Who or what is gaining your allegiance due to the belief that it can protect you? Who are you seeing as the most mighty, the one to be trusted? As I kind of explained earlier, I often back into my own corner. I fear the God of self-sufficiency and discipline and study. When I feel lost, when things are scary to me, I order like 15 books, and I read them, and I take notes, and then I make a plan, and I follow my plan. I do all those things. I back into this corner of discipline, study, and control, really. I'm a control freak. Everyone here knows that already. I don't see God as bigger than either the predicament I'm facing or my little feeble efforts at discipline and self-will. I think this is how it's going to happen. I'm not backing into his corner because I don't know whether it's I don't think he has my back or if I don't think he's able to do it. I'm not really sure what it is. But the point is I back into my own, and it's foolish because those things always devour me. We said in the beginning, my plans never come to fruition, and so those fears devour me instead of backing into God's corner and going to sleep in his hand because he's holding me. Nehemiah, they were building the wall, and they have all these threats and powerful rulers coming at them, and they back into God's corner, long story short, and they align themselves with God because, first of all, they're afraid more of him than of their enemies, but also they say, and we know our God will fight for us. And Darrow backs into King Kong's corner, and he destroys T-Rex. God's wrath is a storm that we should be downright scared of. We make very little of the wrath of God. We don't we talk about it, but we really emphasize his loving side over his wrathful side. But God is a holy God, And I've said before, people who are too quick to see Jesus as only their friend are not going to recognize him when he comes back on a white horse and a tongue of a sword as Lord of our life. He is our friend, and that's what we get here. He's out for our good and he's out for our mercy. And it says he's closer than a brother. So we do have that. But he's Lord, right? And so we should be downright scared of him. We should surrender to his will. But the thing that's so interesting is when we do so, we find in him the haven from God's wrath. He is the thing we're fearing, and then we back into his corner, and the wrath of God passes over it. And I think that's maybe what it means. Moses says, let me see your glory. That huge, majestic power washes over the side of the mountain, and he's there in the cleft, who for us is Jesus, being protected from it. And so you have this delight and this awe of the fear of the Lord, like this big, huge God. And when we have that, I've kind of already said this, that fear of the Lord replaces our other fears. For the sake of time, I won't read this whole passage. But in Mark 4, again, talking about calming the storm, Jesus rebukes the disciples. He says, why are you still so afraid? So he rebukes them for having fear. But then he replaces in them a fear of the Lord. Why are you afraid of this thing? You have me. Fear me instead, because I'm the biggest and the baddest. Psalm 27 says, it's the whole thing, the Lord is my light and my salvation. Who then shall I fear? In other words, if this God is for me, who can be against me? What else can you say that of? What else can you say? Good health. What can be against me if I have good health? Lots of things. What else can be against me if I have a good financial situation? Lots of things. What else can be against me if my kids are well behaved? Lots of things. There's not a single thing that you can say, nothing can be against me if I have this thing in my corner. And we have that with God. So again, whose corner are you backing into? Think about that. Where are you going for that protection? You're not going to get it there. So the bonus question on there is, how does Jesus serve you better in that way? So the last point that we have here, terrible, an even greater Jonah, and this point is short. In Matthew 12, Jesus calls himself a greater Jonah. And this, I kind of wanted to ignore this because I was like, I don't get it. How is Jesus a greater Jonah? But I thought about it, and there are so many parallels, actually. Jonah was given a job to love the unlovable at personal cost, and Jonah ran away. Jesus was given a job to love the unlovable at personal cost, and Jesus was obedient every single step of the way for the joy set before him. He was greater in power. Jonah went to sleep on a ship. Literally, the parallels are astounding. Jonah went to sleep on a ship, and the sailors woke him up and said, do something. And Jonah was powerless to save. Jesus went to sleep on the boat, and the disciples woke him up and yelled, do something. And Jesus calmed the storm and commanded them to have faith. And most of all, what we see here, specifically in relationship to this passage, he was the greatest display of this marriage of God's mercy and his sovereignty. Jonah endured a storm of mercy, a frowning providence that hid the smiling face of God, which intended redemption and mercy. This storm was meant to bring Jonah back. Jesus endured the ultimate storm of mercy on the cross, a frowning providence that hid the smiling face of God, which intended the redemption and mercy for all of mankind. Jonah went into the belly of a whale for 3 days and was miraculously raised back to dry land, causing Jonah to exult in the name of Yahweh. Jesus was dead for 3 days and was miraculously raised back to life, causing us to exalt the name of Yahweh. In Matthew 12, basically what he says there, you can read it, he says, Nineveh believed because of the sign of Jonah's rescue. This generation will also receive a sign, me. I will go into the heart of the earth for 3 days and be delivered. If Nineveh believed because of this sign, you have an even greater Jonah here. Why won't you believe? Why won't you submit? Why won't you surrender? Why won't you come for this protection? If Jonah's story teaches us about the power of God that saves and restores, how much more does Jesus' story teach us this? Will you not fear him? Will you not submit to him? Will you not trust and obey? That's that two sides of the coin, trust and fear, trust and obey. We don't always get where he's taking us and why he's taking us there. But will you not receive the sign of the cross today and the beautiful display of God's power and mercy used for your good, and then submit to him, fear him, surrender to him, climb into his hand, because with or without your permission, he's going to come to your rescue and he's going to do you good. So I'm going to close with this hymn again because it was, where's the end here? Okay, well, it's on the front of my binder, thankfully. It's kind of just summarizes the theme in beautiful poetry. God moves in a mysterious way, his wonders to perform. He plants his footstep in the sea and rides upon the storm. So there's the picture of his sovereignty and his power. Deep in unfathomable minds of never-failing skill, he treasures up his bright designs, there's his plan, and he works his sovereign will. Ye fearful saints, fresh courage take. The clouds ye so much dread, these storms that we don't get, these hard things that are happening, they are big with mercy and shall break in blessings on your head, because he's working all things for good. Judge not the Lord by feeble sense based on our own understanding, but trust him for his grace. Behind a frowning providence, he hides a smiling face. His purposes will ripen fast, unfolding every hour. But the bud may have a bitter taste, but sweet will be the flower. Blind unbelief is sure to err and scan his work in vain. God is his own interpreter, and he will make it plain. So take those discussion questions. Just take a few minutes to examine your heart and see where you're backing into, and for your good, make a course correction. See this truth about God and back into his corner. I'm going to close in prayer for us overall, and then, because I think it works well when you can talk, and then you can close in prayer when you're done instead of us like cutting off. Some people want to go long, some people want to go shorter, so we'll do it that way.